Hi, ladies. Welcome back to another episode of the Blossoming Mama podcast. I'm going to be continuing my discussion from last week. So, this is part two of the conception stories of all of our children. Firstly, let me just do a check in. How are you doing? How's your week going? I guess technically, when you hear this, it's going to be the beginning of the week. So, how is your week going to go? Is that a question? How are you going to set your week up for success? I record this like a whole week early, so it is a Monday, but it's the Monday before. And so far, I've had one day at work, and I'm not gonna lie, it's been pretty ghetto, but in the best possible way, we are helping children and helping them communicate and helping them get into schools. So yeah, that has been going pretty well. And my son is getting his eighth tooth. So he now has 8 teeth at 8 months. And that's kind of ghetto too. I'm going to be honest with you. But other than that, we're doing good. And I'm ready to continue our discussion about making these babies. I don't know how long this story is going to go. So I just want to get right into it. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, please do that because I'm not going to recap what I've said already. So listen to that first and then jump into this episode. All right, let's get to it. All right, so in last week's episode, I talked about the conception stories of my first two children. I'm going to be jumping right into the third conception story. It's not necessarily a long one, but there are many, I guess, moving parts to it that I want to capture because it's a very different story from the first two. Now, I want to say that from the very beginning, it's a very different walk, I guess. It's a spiritual journey. And I say that because after the birth of my second child, my daughter, Corinne, I had a lot of issues like mentally, emotionally, and a lot of that stemmed from birth trauma. And it took me a very long time to bond with her. She was very colicky, and I've talked about this before, but there was just a lot that happened, including difficulties breastfeeding in a shortened breastfeeding journey. And I think all of those factors really had me doubting motherhood, whether or not I was a good mother, whether or not I was ever going to want to have kids again. And honestly, I stayed with that. I stayed with this idea that I didn't want any more kids for a very long time. So it wasn't until Corinne was 3 that I was even open to entertaining the idea of having another child. And so a lot happened around the time that she was 3. I had several family members die, including my father. Actually, that's not true. My father was still alive at that point, but he was very sick. But I had several other family members die that were really close to me, including my maternal and paternal grandmothers, and they were very, very close. My maternal grandmother was truly like a mother to me, and a lot of her death, kind of like dealing with the aftermath, was with me learning my identity all over again. And now I will say that when I was in the postpartum period with Corinne, I was figuring out who I was as a mother. And I think most women would say that if they are, coming off of their first birth, the first child, that they're figuring out who they are as women, as mothers, as individuals. And it naturally happens because when you have this shift, it goes from being like the center of your own world to someone else being the center of your own world. And then just trying to figure out where you fit in and, just kind of trying to make sure that you maintain some of who you are. Like there's so many complicated things that I think I need to spend a separate episode talking about it because I don't feel like I can do it justice today. But anyway, so my daughter was born in 2019. December 2019. And we spent almost a year and a half. I think she was 18 months when we moved back to our hometown, which was across the country. And I was really excited to be with my grandmothers again because they both lived in this town. And when I got back, one of them fell ill almost immediately. And then within months, so 2021 into 2022, the other one had died. So February 2022, that was when my maternal grandmother died. Okay. I'm saying all that because when they died, and especially the second one, my identity was still being solidified. I was actively going to therapy and I was learning that I was harboring abandonment, feelings of abandonment. And that played out because in childhood, there were many things that went on. I don't need to discuss it here, but there were themes where I often felt isolated or abandoned. And it wasn't in a physical way, like I was always present with my family, but the one person that I never really felt abandoned by was my maternal grandmother. And um I want to say that in her death, when I was dealing with coming to terms with those sort of childhood feelings, I was realizing that a lot of um, my grieving process, I guess, was around mourning the fact that the one person that I felt didn't abandon me left. Like she left. She abandoned me, right? She didn't, but that was kind of like what I was reckoning with. And I had to do a lot of internal work during this time, a lot of spiritual work. I really leaned on my belief in Jesus Christ. And I do feel like I grew closer to Jesus at this point because I felt abandoned. And when I realized that I was never alone because he was always with me, in the spirit, I felt whole again. And, there's a lot of moving parts to that, but that's kind of the basis. I felt whole. I felt like that broken piece of me was repaired. And it wasn't until then that I even considered having a child again. And a lot of that was because up until that point, there was still a broken child in me. And I just couldn't make sense of bringing another kid into this world as a broken person. Now, all of this was more subconscious, but I think, yeah, like in hindsight, that's what was going on. So when my grandmother, died and then I was healing from that, I want to say that brought me to somewhere in maybe June of 2022. And from there, I was feeling better and better and better every day. And as we approached July and August, I was having talks with my husband and I was saying, you know what, maybe I do want to have another kid. And he had always wanted other kids. He was just kind of waiting for me to come along. I mean, there was a point before Corinne was born, or sorry, there was a point after Corinne was born where I was seriously considering getting my tubes tied or convincing him to get, his stuff sterilized. And he never agreed to that, thank God. He really just allowed me to come around to the idea, eventually, and I did. So at that point, we were discussing it and I said she's, at the age where she's becoming more independent and doing a lot on her own, and I felt like I was, mentally prepared to take care of a little person again, as a baby. And yeah, so he was on board for it. Now, this is where his story is very different because coming into September and October, we actively started to prepare our minds, our bodies, our spirits for a baby. And what do I mean by that? Well, number one, we started to eat the healthiest that we had ever ate. I was being very physically active, so was he. We were actively cutting out toxins that we knew about. I mean, it's so hard to cut out everything, but everything that we knew that was detrimental, we stopped. So like smoking, drinking, like all of those things, we cut out any sort of, I guess, thing that would obviously do harm. And we really focused on encouraging our fertility through herbs and just natural supplements and things like that. And then mentally, it was just kind of wrapping our minds around the idea of having two children and really having in depth talks about how we would manage it. There were some career changes that needed to happen. So we actively started to do that and make those decisions. And then as far as the spiritual aspect, it was just a continuation for me of what I had already been doing, just really trusting in God as much as I could and, spending time in the word and just honestly being open to the idea of a baby. Now, with that being said, when we opened our hearts to the idea, I started to get dreams. Now, something about me that I have not talked about up until this point is that I have almost prophetic dreams. And, you can debate me on the reality of these things, but I can promise you from my perspective and the types of dreams that I've encountered that these are very real, very powerful experiences. Okay, so with that understanding, I was beginning to have dreams that were letting me know that my baby, my son, was getting ready to enter our lives. And there were many dreams where I had, of me giving birth on our bedroom floor, giving birth in various places, like in different houses in my childhood home. And they were always male children. Um, I'm gonna specifically focus on the main dream because this was in October and we conceived my son on November 5th. I know the exact date and we'll get to that too. But this dream happened in October. Now, this was very special because I have a connection to the moon and I always have had it. In fact, I noticed long ago that my menstrual cycle or the fertility cycle matches the phases of the moon. And what I mean by that is that when I am ovulating, it is almost always near or a full moon. And then when I get my period, there is a new moon. And there's spiritual significance behind that. You can look it up. But this is something I noticed right away. So I always have had this spiritual, I guess, drawing of the moon. I don't know how to describe it, but there's just something there. So anyway, the dream featured a very large moon. Okay, so I'll set the scene. I was like, as the dream starts, you never know exactly where it begins, but I was in our bed, like our actual bed that we have in real life in our room, my husband and I. And I was sitting on the bed with my daughter and my husband, and we were on a hilltop. And when we were looking out on the hilltop, so this is outside, we're not in a room, we're just on the bed. It is overlooking a small town that almost looks like a European town. I don't know, kind of like those maybe waterside, beachside towns that are kind of like built into rocks and things like that. Like envision maybe I'm thinking of like Italy from White Lotus, if you've ever seen that. That's kind of what I'm envisioning, but at night. And so I'm looking over, I'm on the hilltop with my family in the bed, overlooking this valley of homes. And I look up and there is a giant purple moon. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Loki series, but there's a specific episode which is called Lamentus. In the show, they are on a moon and the planet is crashing into the moon. It's look it up. I can't explain it, but it features a planetary body that is actually on the brink of an apocalypse. Like it's going to crash into, the moon and then everything is going to be destroyed, the planet and the earth. So it's an apocalyptic scene. So that's what I'm staring at, a very close moon that appears to be about to crash into our planet. Okay. Now, I look out in the distance and there now is sort of a tsunami or something, like just all of the buildings that were once there are now covered by water. And there's boats on the water and the water's very rocky, and I am not afraid. That's the most important thing I think in any dream, and the interpretation of those dreams, like how you feel in the moment is very important to pay attention to. And I remember not feeling afraid at all. And I actually felt like all of it was very beautiful. And I remember my family not being afraid of it either. Now, what happens next is that we got off the bed and we started to go down into the valley. And I remember my daughter was wanting to record what was happening. So we were working out my phone and trying to get it all set up. I remember, like, in the dream looking at the camera mode of the phone. And I just remember a feeling of awe, excitement, but not being afraid, which is significant because it is an apocalypse. Okay, so now I wake up. Now, what does that have to do with the baby? Well, when I looked into it, an apocalypse doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It just means something that it could be something that is a major change, right? So, like, in an apocalypse, it essentially kind of wipes out what is old and brings in something new. Whatever that new thing is, it's a new state of reality that comes after an apocalypse. And with it being the moon, that was significant because on the next cycle, what did I say before? I ovulate with the full moon, right? Okay. Now, we already know the bed situation, right? Where do babies typically get made? In the bed. Okay. Now, next cycle comes along. We're now in November. My husband and I have a anniversary that we celebrate, our date anniversary, which is November 5th. And November 5th is special to us because remember the 5th of November in V for Vendetta. Okay, we have a lot of references in this episode. I apologize, but that's what's going on. So November 5th was on a Saturday, and it was with a full moon. Now, leading up to November 5th, that week, there was all this hype because they were saying this was a very special full moon. It was a super moon, and it was also a blood moon. And I'll never forget, a couple of days before November 5th, there was like a lottery, like something to do with the Powerball. I think it was like the highest Powerball in history or something like that. And I was looking at the news, and in the background, there was a purple moon. And I remember I kept staring at it because I'm like, oh my goodness, that's the moon from the dream. Like, that's the exact moon that I saw in my dream. And I remember calling my mom about it. And I'm like, Mom, I saw a purple moon. I saw a purple moon in my dream, and now I'm seeing it on TV. This is significant. And I'm thinking about it. And like, I remember again that the full moon was coming on November 5th. And at this point, my husband and I were pretty set that we were gonna be trying for a baby. In fact, we weren't preventing at this point anyway, but I knew, when I was set to ovulate, like, the big day to baby dance. And so that was gonna be, the weekend. Okay. So we get to the 5th, Saturday, and we decided to go on a date. And so we dropped Corinne off with grandparents, and we went to our absolute favorite place to eat around here. It's a Mediterranean restaurant. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the dream, I was overlooking like the Mediterranean. It's very interesting. So Mediterranean restaurant. We had a great time. Like, it was so warm. It was like uncharacteristically warm, like super warm. Like, we were sitting outside eating on a November night warm. Okay. And it was amazing. We had a great time. We spent like $200, came home and watched our favorite movie, which features the 5th of November, V for Vendetta. And then we decided to try and make a baby. And it was a great time without getting too graphic. And then in the morning, we baby danced again, just for good measure. And then I remember almost, I don't know, within days, it was not very long. Within days, I already knew that I was pregnant. I know it sounds crazy, but I just automatically knew. Like I just felt a presence inside of me. And yeah, it was amazing. Like there was no doubt in my mind. And I remember talking to some of my close friends. I was talking to Shane and I kept saying, no, I feel different. I feel different. I felt energetic. I felt like warm and tingly, happy. Like I don't know how to describe it. If anyone who is listening can kind of corroborate what I'm talking about, please do. But yeah, I just knew. So the days go on, and I'm just telling myself I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant. Intuitively, I just knew that it was a boy because of the dreams that I had previous to that. That my son was telling me that he was coming. God was telling me that I was having a son. All of those things, and I want to say maybe 2 weeks later. I mean, it wasn't exactly 2 weeks. I think I found out a couple of days before my period was set to come because I was so sure. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to take a test just to confirm it so I could just like move on with my life and like let Shane know officially. But yeah, so I want to say maybe it was like 10 or 11 days after I ovulated that I took a test and it was positive. And honestly, yeah, like I said, there was no surprise. Like I feel like the first two times there was complete shock. Like if you listen to the previous episodes, there was absolute shock and dismay and confusion. And this one had none of that. It was absolute peace and joy and excitement. Like, wow, there's such a difference in finding out that you're pregnant when you actually put in the effort. I mean, I don't want to say, you guys get what I'm saying. Like there's a very big difference between, I guess, surprise babies and consciously conceived babies. And so that's what I mean. There was just a lot of peace around finding out. So yeah, that was that story. Let's see. I guess I could say how I told Shane about it. I didn't have anything planned. We're not, the Pinterest, social media thing people. So I wanted to involve Corinne because she gets excited about that stuff, but I didn't want to tell her what was happening. Like she likes to do surprise things regardless of if she understands what the surprise is. So I went out and got like the digital test that says pregnant and I gave it to her to hand to him. That was it. And she takes it. She has no clue what it is. She runs over to him and I'm like, give it to dad. He looks at it and he just laughed and I have it recorded. And I think he was laughing because it was almost like too easy. And I did talk about in the last episode that we are blessed enough to have gotten pregnant with our children each time on the first go. And so I think it was almost like maybe he thought we were going to have to work a little bit harder. And I thank God that we didn't because I know that's not everyone's stories and I'm being sensitive to that. But this is ours. And yeah, so he laughed. And then we hugged and we didn't tell Corinne for several weeks. I think we didn't tell her until I was so sick because I automatically start just like puking and not being able to eat anything with every pregnancy. And so I think it got to the point where I was so sick that I had to say what was wrong because she was starting to get worried. Like, why is mommy sick every single day for weeks? Like, this is not the typical. So I want to say maybe around 8 or 9 weeks, I finally told her. And yeah, that's our very last conception story. To date, we are not pregnant right now, and we do not use birth control. I do use, like as I said many times, I do track my fertility, and that's so I know, I guess, days to avoid. But as we learn with our sweet Corinne, that we plan, and God laughs. So We don't have any plans to have any children, any new children soon because I'm still very much enjoying my little 8-month-old boy. But there's always another chance, and we have the door open to have more children. So I look forward to the next one, and I'll definitely have to record that one as well. I did want to just touch on the dreams again because something that came up time and time again with Elias's birth and I guess the pregnancy too was that when I had that dream about the apocalypse, I felt peace and, excitement, all those things, but mostly peace. And that continued throughout the pregnancy and the birth and postpartum. And so it was really interesting when I thought about it that in my dream, I was being let know that I was going to have an incredibly peaceful journey with this baby. And that's saying something because I had a wild pregnancy and a free birth. And that's not typically what people think. Peace is not something that people think about when considering someone who doesn't get any prenatal care, like any medicalized formal prenatal care, and someone who just has a baby in their house by themselves. But that's what I felt. And so that's significant. And I think it was absolutely prophetic and correct. And I thank God that I had that journey. And I actually really hope and pray that more women can experience the type of peace that I experienced with pregnancy and birth and postpartum because it's blissful. I feel like I'm still riding on it 8 months later. And I hope I'm rambling now. Sorry, guys. But I hope that in listening to these stories and following my page, the Blossoming Mama, that someone out there who is listening can learn from this and learn that the standard way and like the modern way is not the only way. And this fear and paranoia and just overall like lack of trust in womanhood and the journey itself is not the only way that we can exist. There is an alternative. And you don't have to have my story. You don't have to be wild and free, but you can still enter motherhood with a level of peace that surpasses all earthly understanding. All right, ladies, that does it for this episode. I think I've said enough. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful story. As I said in the beginning, it is my favorite story to tell. And I never fully get to tell it, in its greatness. So thank you for allowing me to say all of this today, and thank you for listening. As always, please fill out the Q&A, like the what did you think about this episode, because I actually value the feedback. I want to get better. This is a new podcast. Every week I'm thinking of ways to make it better and more entertaining and more informational. So when you give feedback, it actually helps me. Also, please give us a rating, especially if you're listening on Spotify, but I think it's available on any platform to rate us, like us, whatever you need to do, because it gets our podcast more visibility and it gets it in the hands of women who really need this information in a world where it's often censored or just not spread. People often don't know about this stuff. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll see you girls in the next episode. Take care of yourselves.